You're listening to the podcast Coffee with Mike and Julie, Libertarians Talk Psychology. This is current commentary from an MBA businessman and a PhD psychologist.
Look what they done to my song, Ma.
So today I've been reading this article, and it's just blowing my mind about the name of the article is The Development of Identity Fusion, and it's in Association for Psychological Science, November 21. And what has occurred to me is that and another article that I've talked about just kind of dawns on me that we baby boomers have contributed to the decline of the structure of our culture in the United States. So I wanted to today just to kind of outline what this article says. If anybody wants to go pull it up, I think it's available. I don't know. Some of these are available free of charge in their public domain. But I want to kind of make a couple of points, and then I just want for us to brainstorm this idea. And the idea mainly is that politics have become the new religion. So religion is a way of capturing people's life scripts and emotional meaning they have in their life. My belief is what we have now is politics has become that life script, and that people are embracing political views, which, can be of a religious nature, but they have become people's religion because of the lack of principles and ideas that are really, truly sacred and sacred type religious ideas. My view is we're in a cultural values decline that is really frightening in a way.
A moral decline, is that?
Well, I think the moral decline goes right along with it. Morality, and I'm in a community of people who don't understand what morality is, but morality to me is extremely simple from an evolutionary psychology standpoint. Morality is you don't cheat. You don't cheat. You try to understand when you're unconsciously cheating, and you make sure to curb your conscious cheating. But you don't cheat. Whatever the game is, whatever the deal is that you make with a person, you don't cheat. That's the simple one-liner on morality. But you hear a lot of people who confuse generosity and altruism with morality, and that's not morality. That's good to be altruistic, it's certainly, but it's also naive to think that altruism is not actually one of the selfish choices.
So I'm trying to categorize this along with the libertarian principle of the non-aggression principle.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
And the non-aggression principle says you don't take from others. You don't take other people's
Which is cheating. Okay, that's
property,
cheating.
which is cheating.
Yeah, that's cheating.
I guess that's cheating. Mm-hmm. You would call that cheating.
Putin invading Ukraine is cheating.
However, there are some social things that libertarians say it's okay to do, but you might want to consider it immoral, like prostitution. Well, that prostitution theoretically is not cheating.
It's not cheating.
Because it's between two consenting adults, but you could say it's immoral. Gambling.
Well, someone would say it's immoral. I don't say it's immoral. I don't think, you're talking now about morality.
Well, I'm just trying to get it straight in my head what we're talking about. So I hear what you're saying, that there's a distribution, and cheating falls under the libertarian principle. People think if you are not altruistic, then you are immoral, and that's...
Well, people have different definitions, and there are several different types The Myers-Briggs types we've talked about, each type has a kind of a different take on morality because they see the world from a different standpoint. I think we've gone down a rabbit hole because of, what you're talking about, is that what I'm talking about today is not actually morality, although I want to bring that in. Let me kind of try to wrap up an introduction. So the development of identity fusion kind of blew me away because these guys, Reese and Whitehouse, they're making the distinction. I wanted to review this idea about development of identity fusion because it's different. They're taking a different tact, and I think it's a good one because what we're seeing is more than social identity theory, which is the original theory about people identify with their groups, but now these two authors, Reese and Whitehouse, are kind of looking at the extreme cases, but my take on their work is that we're also now finally understanding how important fusion is rather than just identifying. Let me just say that a little more clearly, is that identifying with something sounds pretty benign, but fusion sounds pretty serious. And I think we're seeing more fusion than we're seeing identification.
So I need to understand what you mean by fusion.
Let me say a little more about it. I'm going to read from the article. Identity fusion is an extreme form of group alignment in which individuals are so strongly bonded that they would be willing to sacrifice themselves for the group. This sense of oneness is thought to be accompanied not by a less salient personal self, as social identity theory would predict, but instead by an expanded sense of personal identity in which the self is strengthened and emboldened by the group. Okay, that says a million things. It means, I'm going to use the term identifying as the healthy way of going about becoming a member of a group, and compare and contrast with fusion, which is what I would consider an unhealthy way of going about identifying with a group. And they believe they can predict this extreme behavior. Where someone will blow themselves up, a suicide bomber is an example of that. But after reading the article, I believe that it's a lot more common than we think, than these authors think, that fusion is going on now with our population of young people, and we're not really addressing it. The fusion becomes the pathological way of group identity. Now, you want to ask a question?
Well,
it's pretty complicated, but...
Well, the simplistic way for me to interpret that is that fusion goes into the territory of the group is more important than the individual, and that the individual may even sacrifice.
That's exactly
themselves.
What these authors are trying to look at, is like, what could possibly explain a suicide bomber sacrificing their life for the group identity? And this is happening a lot. And the idea is profound, that I think actually the article makes me think that what we thought is identification is actually fusion, and that we all ought to be very aware that identity fusion is occurring. Now, let me throw one other theoretical thing in, and then we can just talk about it. And I want to use my own self story as, this was a very enlightening article, because in this article, Reese and Whitehouse lay out both the biological reasons to fuse, which are important. The baby has fusion to the mother and the father and the family, and the adolescent goes through fusion. Just a couple of these right now, then I'll come back to them later. About age 10 to 12, local fusion happens with peer groups.
Oh, but don't skip over 0 to 12. Say that again. It sounds like 0 to 12, fusion is a healthy thing.
Okay, so you're asking questions that I can't answer.
Okay.
But, this actually is kind of a new concept. I've seen articles on it. I think they're finally getting to why the group... I've been puzzled by why the group identification. I mean, we libertarians, we don't do as much group identification or group fusion. But I've been puzzled by other people, like, why do they fuse with their groups, or why do they identify with these groups so dramatically? So these are questions that I think we're going to be exploring in later podcasts. But for now, I'm going to jump in and make the conclusion for myself that identification is healthy and more superficial and more flexible, and that fusion is more inflexible and instinctual and genetic. So what you're asking about is fusion of a biological nature of a young infant is certainly impacts survival. That baby knows its mother at like 3 days or 5 days. It can identify its mother rather than its non-mother. I mean, this has a survival, this is genetic survival evolution. So does that sort of answer that question?
Yeah.
Okay. So
So you're getting into the different stages of the fusion.
Yeah, the article, Reese and Whitehouse give you the different stages, and they say it goes all the way to 30, but they give a chart where you get the biological fusion up to about 10 years, but then you start what's called the local fusion. And that's with the peer groups and the society and all that. Okay, so I want to throw in one other thing, and then I just want to talk about what this means for us.
Okay, but I just want you to know I'm hanging, waiting to hear how, I mean, you got me through about age 12 or 15, and you said it goes to age 30. I'm kind of curious.
The chart does not go to 30, but they have said in the article that it can include all the way up to 30. I think it probably can include 40 and 50. I mean, this is new science.
Okay.
This is new theoretical science. So you're asking questions because you're real interested and you're real into it with me. And okay, so when I read that article, I've been reading it, and it's really cool to think about. There are a lot of researchers, one's Dan McAdams, about this autobiographical narrative that we all, as people, and I'm sure Jordan Peterson is all over this with his Maps of Meaning book, but we all develop a life story, and it's a narrative. And we have this life story pretty entrenched by about age 20, 25. We are using memories. We cluster the memories. We chunk the memories into storylines, and we have a narrative. We become our own work of fiction.
We're entrenched, and some of it is entrenched with groups. In other words, we may not...
Well, our peer groups.
Family group, peer group. So we have this...
We go from family, biologically, we go from family to our, other experiences.
Okay.
But, our narrative includes both in some degree, and everybody's autobiographical narrative is different. Some involves trauma. The Reese and Whitehouse point out that any traumatic experience is chunked harder, into this. Mm-hmm. Okay, so in a minute, I'm going to just kind of use myself as an example of things in this autobiographical narrative. But before we go to that, I'll just take this one other thing. Now, this is the article. I've talked about this article, and this is another article that blows me away with the changes over time in social class. This article title is Defining Social Class Across Time and Between Groups. And I've talked about it before. A group of people out of University of Illinois. This is a little bit older, 2017. But what they found is that over the last 40 years, there's been a huge change in what people valued as important and how that impacted their sense of their social class. And it is related in some groups to self-esteem. But the point here is that there's been a declining importance of occupational prestige, and there's been a decline in what's called the Victorian bargain, which is I'm going to be a good person, and that makes up for not having a lot of money. And then there's been a growing importance of income. So we have moved very distinctly over the last 40 years to valuing income aside from contribution aside from being a good person, integrity. So, I mean, there's a huge problem in decline of, and this to me does relate to morality, is what you think is important. If money is important, what puts the limits on what you can do? Mm-hmm. Okay, so all of this makes me think that we baby boomers contributed to a real decline for our children and maybe their children, but the next generation, in the fabric of our social system.
Okay, so let me try to collapse this a little bit for myself. You have this identity fusion, you have identity and fusion that develops a person's character, and it becomes more and more solidified as they get older.
Yeah.
So from about age 30 on, that landscape or the painting that they paint for their life history doesn't change very much.
Well, I think those are hypotheses.
Yeah.
Okay. It certainly can change. But anyway, There's a development of a life script and a psychological reality for a person that begins in childhood and it continues through adolescence.
Okay, so that's the identity fusion concept you talked about.
Identification and or fusion.
Okay, and then you brought up another concept.
Social class.
Social class and the importance of social class when it comes to...
How it's changed.
Yeah, how it has changed to focus more on money and less on person's character.
Well, let me give some examples of what you're talking about from my own. It was fun for me to read the article on the development of identity fusion because it really did focus me on, well, what's my autobiographical narrative story, my life, what's my story? I never saw that in a film, like, what's his story? What was that film where the guy says, what's your story? Well, and Dan McAdams, that's a great question. What's your story? When someone is getting to know somebody and what's your story, they're really asking what you're talking about. Yeah, and Dan McAdams, he's a David McClellan student, or grandchild of David McClellan. I don't mean grandchild, I mean psychology grandchild. But he's made a life of talking about the story, the narrative story of a person. And here we go. So it made me think like my story. You probably knew early on that you were different from other kids. I did, and I knew it, and really, I did not know that I was rejected by the community.
Like the community always rejects the newspaper.
Well, that's a question about it, but the newspaper is the town crier element and the detection system, and so it's likely to, stir up a lot of trouble. And let me say, and we've said this many times over several podcasts, but your family's newspaper really was a newspaper. It wasn't, a flyer. It wasn't about money. And it wasn't. The main thing is it wasn't about money. It wasn't all sweet. I mean, your family's newspaper was exposing government activities. Yeah, Daddy liked to do that. So, yeah, he was good at it. So, when I think back on my flashbulb memories and things like that, I see where, and I don't think I ever, until I did the newspaper for the psychologist, I went directly in times of stress. When I was stressed out by what the psychologist did, which I consider immoral, in 2008 and 2009, one group secretly took over the profession. Okay, so that distressed me, and now that I look back on it, my fusion, and I think fusion with my profession, because it made me feel like I was somebody, when in fact now that doesn't work at all, because I think these people are not particularly healthy. Wow, that's interesting that you fused with your perception of what your profession stood for,
And your profession changed.
My profession changed, and I was really distressed by it.
You were left in the cold.
I was left out in the dark and the cold, and like, what the hell is going the fuck on? So then I come up with something, and I don't think I was conscious of what I was doing. I don't really think I was mindful. I come up with a newspaper. Now, I do know that part of the problem with anything is secrecy. You know, I did see the secrecy being a part of the cheating going on in the community of Louisiana psychologists. So I came up with a newspaper. But, you know, somebody might ask, how come, I mean, nobody else came up with a newspaper. It's like that was the tool. Well, I was early on fused with what a newspaper means in a community and why it's a principled act.
And how it's useful to problem solving, to tell you the truth.
How it's essential to problem solving. How the town forum how the citizen must have information. And that came with, and I remember this, I have a lot of flashbulb memories about this. My father saying, you know, and convincing me of that people are good if they have enough information and if you can trust them. You know, if they're empowering them with information and they have a chance to work it out and there's a conflict of a discussion, and that's all going to lead to a good decision. So
and that is true no matter what their identity fusion and morality are. You know, with information, the individuals gravitate toward good solutions.
Yeah. So that ideology, you know, was passed down to me automatically, and it was a combination of what Reese and Whitehouse would call phenotypic matching, where I matched my biology to my father and mother. My biology was matched, and then during adolescence, I reported for the newspaper. I took pictures for the newspaper. I got newspaper awards. You know, I was involved more with the newspaper than I was with my peer group. Because, you know, I was involved in basketball. I was involved in 4-H, and I was involved in the church, and I was involved in the science club and all that. But I didn't really fuse with any of those. I mean, those were great activities, but you know, in thinking back on it, the real fusion was with the First Amendment.
I'm sorry. You probably make me take this out of the podcast.
I might, and I might not. We're wrapping up anyway.
Well, because I'm not sure what my identity fusion was. I'm sure I had plenty.
Well, being a jock.
Well, being a jock, so
because you still haven't let that go.
No, I'm fused. But I remember I had the basketball goal in the driveway, and I used to practice my free throws. And I got to where I was pretty good at hitting those free throws. I could get 7 out of 10, which I was proud of. 7 out of 10. And I remember there was one day you came home from work. Here you were in your nice clothing. You had a little briefcase, and I'm shooting baskets. And I invited you to come shoot baskets. And damn, you hadn't touched the basketball in I don't know how long. You set down your briefcase and took off your jacket. And you hit 8 out of 10 free throws. Here I am, proud of doing 7 out of 10, and you hit 8 out of 10. And you aren't even fused with athletics. You're fused with the newspaper. I would
never consider myself a jock, but I'm a perfectionist. And my basketball coach in high school, we were trained, you better not miss your free throws. Those are free. You better not miss the damn free throw. We didn't get to go home until we could get 10 out of 10. So I was a good free throw. It's like... Yeah, but, you know, that's the point today, that there are two things that are going on in our country. There's a detachment from the values of the last, of 30 and 40 years ago. So the baby boomers, and I kind of blame us. I don't know that we did our job transferring the values that our parents, the World War II generation, my parents transferred the values to me. I mean, I remembered the church training, it's like you confess your sins, you acknowledge your sins, you try to be a good person, you try to do good deeds, all of that. But also, in growing up in a newspaper family, the idea of information flow. And it doesn't surprise me now, although it did when I started thinking about it, of why I became a psychologist, because that's the same set of ideas.
Yeah.
It's exactly the same set of ideas. But I don't know that we have transferred that to our children or in their children, that the foundational fusion, I see this idea of fusion becoming that politics, which are win-lose dynamics between self-interested groups. That's what politics are. Politics is or are contest for self-interest ideas. That's what politics is. And it's corrupting science, it's corrupting medicine, it's corrupting school systems, it's corrupting politics, it's corrupting everything. And it's the new religion.